Alan Dean flies out of Abilene, Kansas, spraying herbicide on his neighbor's wheat field to shrivel the weeds so they won't clog the combine. The language, English. The crop, wheat. The technology, sophisticated. The results, bountiful. The place, Pato on the Yucatan Peninsula. The farmers, Mexican Indians. The language, Mayan. The crop, corn. The technology, primitive. The place, Talavera, 100 miles north of Manila in the Philippines. The language, Filipino. The crop, rice. The place, Lilongwe, Malawi, in Southeast Africa. The language, Chichewa. The place, Debrecen, 50 miles south of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. There are those who consider the forthcoming end of the 20th century as the sunset of the second millennium. There are others, including the World Bank, who consider the same event as the sunrise of the third millennium.
The problem is that food is a tremendously vital component in the economy of almost any society. The quick proof of that is that rich people are never hungry. Simply because food is abundant for people who can pay for it. It's not abundant for people who can't pay for it. And what you have to pay is determined by many factors that poor people have no control over. So if we ask, is there a food problem in the world, the answer is yes, but you really can't solve it simply by saying the earth cannot provide enough food for everybody to eat, because that's blaming it on the earth. What you got to blame it on is economic and political systems that fail to make it possible for people to afford food.
I think the have nations have a role to play and will continue to play a role in worldwide production and export of food commodities. But if you look at the locations of developing countries, the distances involved, the poor infrastructure, you will see that it's just well-nigh impossible to cover the food gap in developing countries through shipments.
So you have a bottleneck which, as the population of the world grows, you have to spread your food production, otherwise even if you can produce it in Kansas, you won't get it there, apart from the fact that they don't have the money to pay for it.
I should emphasize that in a world in which population will continue to increase, despite our efforts, for at least a century, without rapid progress in smallholder agriculture, there can be no long-term solution to the food problem. And I think it's time, therefore, for all of us to confront the issue head-on.
In the 1960s, when the miracle wheat and rice seeds were developed, it was easy to expect this green revolution to be the answer to the world's food problems. But a lot of things have taught us that we are only at the beginning of this revolution. For example, getting those seeds adapted to the different ecologies affecting farming in various parts of the world, the inevitable problems of drought, floods, and pest epidemics, and finally, the steadily increasing world population. The miracle varieties, with their requirements for fertilizers, pesticides, and ample water at the right time, are the best hope for ultimately winning the struggle. But the struggle continues.
There's a gigantic misunderstanding about what motivates the small farmer. What motivates the small farmer is exactly what motivates any human being. His care about those he loves and his care about getting ahead. The fact that he doesn't have economic opportunity, the fact that he is poor, has absolutely nothing to do with his capacity to understand his situation. He is not stupid. He is extremely shrewd. On the whole, he is far more shrewd than people who are better off, because shrewdness is his ticket to survival.
It's no exaggeration to say that people live very much as they must have lived 1,000 years ago, with a few exceptions that what's happened in the last decades has made their life worse in many cases than it was before. The main reason is population increase, which means that land that was enough for people even 50 years ago is no longer enough, so that there's less land and less food for the people that live there. There is always in these people's lives a very ever-present threat of disaster. In some cases, we estimate that the drought hazard is as much as once every 4 years. In other words, the crop will fail once every 4 years. And when the crop fails, if people don't have enough stored, then they go hungry, they go elsewhere, they migrate, they eat their cattle, or they depend on some kind of assistance which may or may not come from outside.
If we really want to improve the lot of the poor, we have to have conviction that we really want to do it. It has to be a basic decision of the government of the country to develop its, help to develop its rural poor.
Land reform is often not a matter of breaking up big estates, but of amalgamating small parcels of land, which through traditional inheritance patterns, you've got a fragmentation which is so great that, well, it's impossible to introduce new technology because even a bullock and plough couldn't turn around on the size of the plot, let alone a tractor.
Where tribal holdings have been honored by tradition for hundreds of years, for the first time, the boundaries between villages now must be marked off.
We find that it isn't very often that people are worried about how safe the water is. Their first and very fundamental problem is getting water at all for very fundamental purposes. You need water to cook with, to drink, and hopefully to wash yourself and your dishes and your children. People are concerned, even in very primitive villages, with really contaminated water, and people can be aware that it's effectively a kind of poison. But the very first problem is to get water at all, and people still have to walk many miles just to get a jug of water to cook the maize stew in.
Water is maybe the basic ingredient on which you would build all the other ingredients like extension credit, fertilizer, improved seeds. If you have only 500 millimeters of rainfall, your technological spectrum of what you can do is very limited. If you have water, let's say an aquifer, you explore it, you mine it, then you can triple, quadruple, quintuple the income of the farmer, which makes a significant difference, and then one can really speak of progress or development.
Irrigation water
is important for two reasons. A, it enables to grow crops when it does not rain, which is usually half a year, at least. If you have irrigation water, you can gap these 6 months and produce out of the same soil a second crop. The second importance of irrigation water in comparison with rainfall is that irrigation water is more or less available at your demand.
A road usually is built to connect areas which already marketing something. But some areas which have a potential don't have a road yet because the potential has not been realized. There is no production. Because only if a road is there, you would be able to transport the produce out. If, for example, the government would come in and bring the extensionist, and the extensionist would design new methods, the farmer would produce, he would not have any outlet to bring it out and hence really no incentive to produce. So if the road is there, he sees already something has changed. Maybe it's also an indication that the government is serious after all. He would be much more inclined to listen if he sees some example of progress somewhere, and then he would react to this. So I would think maybe the road as an agent to bring development to remote areas is a very good first step.
Extending know-how is an absolutely vital link in any rural development program. Sometimes you make more headway by using a puppet show or a radio program than by the traditional demonstration technique.
Bueno mga kaibigan, tayo ay magpapatuloy ngayon sa ating palatuntunan at nais ko rin sabihin sa inyo na ang lektura natin sa gabing ito ay
In most cases, our problem is that we don't have extension agents who see themselves as change agents rather than as technicians. Because once you can get people who understand the process of being an activist, of being a change agent, the farmers themselves can be the extension personnel.
Now, to begin with, you need to train large corps of trained people who would be catalyst for enhancing productivity of the farmers. You need to train them. It takes time. And you need to give them institutional framework in which they can operate, such as extension service and government service. And then you have to set up actually banking institution. Because small farmers are located in areas remote from centers of civilization. Now, you have to educate them to begin with. And then once you educate them, you have all the red tapes involved in banking. I don't mean just conservative red tapes. You know, these people are not used to concept of borrowing. They are more used to concept of handouts. Now, by credit, we mean we deliver goods and services, causing to improve their productivity. In return, we have to recover the investment. And many of these small farmers are not used to this concept.
Rural development programs can work, and they're probably the best hope for a population that's becoming urban at an alarming rate. But to be successful, they have to be designed to fit the circumstances of the farmers in each individual country.
The solutions to the food problem are not all out on the farm. The trip from the farm to market is every bit as important. If the farm prices are too low, the farmers are not going to be motivated to do the extra work, to take the extra chances, to raise that extra food. Or maybe they'll produce it, but hoard it, hang on to it, and wait for better prices. But if the farmers' prices are set where they should be, and the food is produced, that frequently means that the price of food in the city is too high for poor people to afford. This marketing distribution process bears very heavily on the success or failure of programs that are designed to increase food. One of the biggest problems all around the world is the huge exodus to the cities from the countryside by poor people looking for a better life. They're not just looking for more money. They're coming from places that have had no kind of basic social services at all.
In many cases, we find it too frightening a picture to look literally at population projections. We find that government officials and we ourselves have to come to the conclusion that it can't be that way, that there has to be some change within the next 10 to 15 years that will stop what looks inevitable from the data and the statistics. In some countries, it could be catastrophe, it could be massive migration, it could be technological breakthroughs. But if you have any spark of optimism, which you have to work in this business, you have to think that some of the terrible things aren't going to take place.